Hi, everyone. I hope you are all doing well and staying safe during these difficult times. Thank you for taking time to join us today to take a look at the important work that TWS does with climate and public lands. My name is Gabriel Otero. I'm the Colorado Plateau representative for the Wilderness Society based in Grand Junction, Colorado, and I will be presenting alongside one of our great contractors.
Thanks, Gabriel. Hi, everyone. My name's Jolena. And again, thank you for joining us for this presentation. I'm, like Gabriel said, a contract organizer for the Wilderness Society.
Thanks, Jolena. A bit about who the Wilderness Society, who we are. Our mission is to protect wilderness and to inspire Americans to care for our wild places. That breaks down to land and water, so protecting our wild public land and large connected landscapes. That's important for a number of reasons we'll talk a little bit about today. Our people outdoors, so we want people to experience nature and to get out to these places so that they care about them. Many of you have already been to those, but we also want to bring a diverse number of people to the outdoors. And our third part is climate and energy. So we know that energy development is very important and essential to climate change and being part of the solution. So we also work in that. We've been around for a little over 80 years. We have 1 million members and supporters and a dozen offices across the country. And today we want to touch on and provide insight on how public lands are part of the problem when it comes to climate change, but more importantly, the major role that it plays in being part of the solution. And this next slide here is of our public lands and waters. They comprise nearly a quarter of our nation's landmass and include our national parks, wildlife refuges, national monuments. Among them are the Grand Canyon, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, Yellowstone National Park. And our public lands and waters, are critical because we get our clean air and clean water in large part because of our public lands. So all of our clean water we drink, we get from our national forests and whatnot. So as well as the special places that we seek to recreate. And we'll go into this a little bit more, but we see the importance of protecting our public lands and waters because of the impacts we're seeing from our climate. Often our public lands are the last places for endangered, threatened species that are displaced from their seasonal habitats due to catastrophic fires, floods, disease, or other invasive species.
Thanks, Gabriel. So yeah, as Gabriel said, these public lands are vast and take up a large portion of the United States landmass, and they're for everyone. And they look like a lot of different things. So what public lands really are the lands that are for all people and representing land that is open to the public and managed by federal, state, and local governments. And these places include locations that the public frequents often, so parks and forests, but also monuments and wilderness areas that are less frequented. And some lands have special designations that protect them for recreation and conservation. And other lands are for wildlife or the intrinsic value of the ecosystems. Like Gabriel said, without clean air or without public lands, we wouldn't have our clean air and clean water. So these lands, these public lands are protected for different purposes, and they're incredibly important. And specifically in our state of Colorado, we have a lot of beautiful public lands. So we have Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve, which is on the left, the photo on the left with the girl sliding down one of the sand dunes. We have Rocky Mountain National Park. We have national forests, like White River National Forest is the most frequented of all national forests. And then we have amazing wildlife. In the middle photo, there's the bighorn sheep. And on the right, there is the Rocky Mountain National Park. There's special cultural and historical artifacts that you can see at a lot of different national parks, which is pretty cool. And we enjoy public lands for a lot of different reasons. So whether you like to hike or rock climb or bike, there's all sorts of things to do, and you don't have to be an incredible athlete to to be able to enjoy public lands. And on the left-turn photo, there's Curacanti National Recreation Area with land fishing. And on the photo on the right, there is Mount Sneffels, which is a common place to hike. And this is proposed wilderness. So this would be a common place to hike and climb and basically enjoy wilderness. And here's some photos of some children, kids playing around in public lands, and for some of them it was their first time, and you can see how happy they are, and it's so healthy for them too. Studies have shown that children who spend more time outside have better brain development, so it's really great to see that. And a program that works on that specifically within the Wilderness Society, not just with youth, but with anyone that lives in an urban area that might not have access to wilderness. We have a program called Urban to Wild, basically saying that access to nature is a human right. And a lot of the work they do is just based on access and inclusion in public lands. So if you want to check that out, we will include that link with all the other Alliance Center links on the homepage of this Earth Day event. And public lands are managed in sometimes complicated ways. A lot of different agencies are involved. But most prominently, we have the BLM, or the Bureau of Land Management, managing 248 million acres, or 10.5% of all the land in the country under the BLM. And then the U.S. Forest Service with 193 million, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with 89 million, and the National Park Service with 84 million. And then you can see on that chart, the circles are based on the size of land that is managed. And again, 26% of all land is under those four agencies, which is pretty amazing. And then there's the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Reclamation, Army Corps of Engineers, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which also have some federal lands under their management. But yeah, each federal agency has different purposes and different goals. And these lands are managed for different reasons. Sometimes for wildlife, for forest preservation, sometimes not for forest preservation, but conservation, so multiple use. Spiritual connection, so for example, Bears Ears, which you've probably heard of in Utah, has major spiritual significance among the tribes that originally inhabited that land. And so that national monument is super important for those spiritual reasons. And that's just one example. But then also in like White River National Forest, like I mentioned, is the most frequently visited national forest in the whole country. And this forest has so many different purposes for management. It's going to have wildlife, clean air and clean water, so ecosystem preservation, but then also timber and grazing. And so multiple use mandate is what that's called. And yeah. So given all that information about public lands, we're just going to have you take a little bit of time to ask yourself a few questions and ask a friend and just talk about this amongst whoever you're with right now. And what do you use public lands for is the first question. So national parks, have you been to state parks or local parks? Do you go to one every day maybe, or maybe you only go once a month or once a year? What do you think public lands are used for the most? So do you think it's for skiing or recreation or energy? And then why do you care about them? So what makes them important to you? Do you have special memories and moments within these public lands? And then what issues on public lands are you seeing in your community? So have you been involved in any political action? Have you noticed anything controversial? And definitely you can pause the video and take a second to think about these questions, remembering and keeping in mind that the massive chunk of BLM land, so remember the BLM has 248 million acres of land in the US. 90% of that land is open to oil and gas drilling. So keep that in mind as you consider the importance of these public lands to you personally. But now we're going to move on.
Thanks.
Yeah. To Gabriel.
Thanks, Jolena. And I just want to say I apologize for any background noise. I do have my kids here. We are all stuck at home due to the shelter-in-place orders, so trying to manage that. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about addressing climate change. So public lands are a large contributing factor to climate change that we are facing today and the consequences that we are seeing daily. Next slide, please. So these are some of the facts and consequences of climate change. You can look over that graphic a bit, and then I'll touch on that in just a second. So climate change, for those who may not know, we're seeing a global increase in temperature from greenhouse gas emissions. The main human sources of greenhouse gas emissions are fossil fuel use, deforestation, intensive livestock farming, and the use of synthetic fertilizers and industrial processes. So the global increase in temperature due to greenhouse gas emissions must be limited to at or below 1.5 degrees Celsius to avoid unimaginable climate change consequences, according to leading scientists across the world. That means the greenhouse gas emissions must be cut by 45% below 2010 levels by 2030 and taper down to net zero emissions by 2050. And to do that, we have to transform our energy economy in ways the world has never seen before in the next 12 years. And we're already facing the consequences of climate change in our everyday lives. Everybody is. However, in the graphic above, we're seeing the groups that are hurt the most and that are taking the most impact right now. As you can see there, communities of color. There's some great studies on that we'll get into in just a couple slides that break down the communities of color that are facing and taking the biggest brunt from pollution due to climate change. Also, elderly and children, they're often the canaries in that they get sick first from this pollution. They show the first signs of that, so they're on the front lines taking the brunt. And then also low-income communities who oftentimes, when there are like an oil refinery or other plants that are industrial plants that are going up, they put them in low-income neighborhoods. They don't put them in the nice, wealthy, affluent neighborhoods. This slide here shows the effects of climate change in Colorado that I'm sure most of you or all of you are all aware of. You know, we've seen the devastating wildfires across our state these last few years. There's also been floods and drought and air pollution that's led to upticks in asthma and other health complications. So this is something that isn't just not, you know, it's fact. There's evidence of it every day around us, but it's also important to acknowledge that even the Trump administration in 2018, when they released their report on the effects of climate change, they outlined the possible consequences and acknowledge that it's a real problem. That was released on a Black Friday, so you might not have heard about it, of 2018, but that report is out there, and I encourage anyone to look into that if you want more information on how they view it as well, of the Trump administration. So this slide here, again, we're going to be talking more about oil and gas extraction on public lands, since that is a big contributor. That leads to more air pollution. As you can see there on the slide, Denver ranks 4th in air pollution in the US, which when I first read that, I was pretty shocked because I didn't think they would rank that high. That's not good. And then other places in the state, we're seeing that as air pollution and pollution as well. In Grand Junction, which is in the southwestern part of the state, there was 86 poor air quality days in 2018, and then 14% higher asthma rate in the San Luis Valley than in the rest of the state. And then also there's a thing called pollution inequity, which takes into account the amount of exposure to air pollutions for a given racial ethnic group compared to the national average, and then the amount of pollution causing consumption compared to the national average. So blacks are exposed to 21% more and contribute 23% less, making their pollution inequity 56%, and Hispanics are exposed to 12% more pollution than the average, but contribute 31% less to the average, making their pollution inequity 63%. To put that in a little more perspective, non-whites that aren't Hispanic have a 17% pollution advantage, meaning that the pollution they put out, they get 17% less when breathing it in. So that's getting back to, again, the people of color, communities of color, excuse me, bearing the brunt. And this graphic here, again, just illustrates that for the visual learners. I think it's a great graphic here just to kind of show the pollution they put out and then the pollution that they breathe in. This is just for air pollution. There's other types of pollution, obviously. But this study, we will include a link to it. It was conducted by multiple U.S. universities. And in the email for this, we'll include the link. But it goes through and it breaks down, again, like we talked about, that disproportionate impacts on these communities. So now let's talk about why public lands are part of the climate change problem. As you can see here, we have the first graphic from the third slide of our public lands and waters. And the one off to the left there points how public lands that we enjoy are talked about early, and they're a huge contributor to this issue. But in particular, more than 90%, as Jolena had mentioned, of the multiple use public lands are open for leasing for coal and oil and gas. So that's nearly 700 million acres of oil and gas onshore and 1.5 billion offshore. And that's 570 million acres of coal deposits. So that makes the US government one of the largest energy asset managers in the world. And this results in a huge amount of energy. So most Americans don't realize the extent to which federal lands are sources of our fossil energy. In 2017, federal lands and waters contributed 42% of total U.S. coal production, 24% of total U.S. oil production, and 13% of total U.S. gas production. So big factors, and those are our public resources that we have say over how they're managed, so we can make a big difference in that management. So to put that into context, that would put just public lands in the United States as the 5th largest contributor of emissions in the world, ahead of entire countries such as Germany, Brazil, Japan, and Canada. So on a global scale, if we can put in policies that will reduce our emissions, federal policies that will reduce our emissions, and again, how we talked about transforming our economy, that can make a big difference. This slide here gets into that a little bit more too. Natural gas waste on public lands. You can see there the what looks like gas burning up, which representing, I believe, a flare. The larger ones are showing where more flaring's happening than the smaller ones that are dotted across the map there on the west. And so flaring is when they're drilling for gas and they hit a pocket of gas. If it's dangerous to avoid an explosion, they'll burn it off. However, there's alternatives to burning it off. You can pipe it to a nearby facility, or you can capture it on site. Those technologies are available, which if every well in America was to capture that instead of flaring it, leaking it, or venting it, it would save us American taxpayers over $2.3 billion. So a lot, and also that would contribute to fueling 3.3 million cars in 1 year. So it'd make a big difference. There was a federal rule called the methane rule that was in place under the Obama administration, has since been rolled back under the Trump administration, but that would have required operators to capture, to not flare, and to capture venting and leaks as well, and provide more oversight to make sure that that was being done to limit self-reporting. So next slide, please. So we're lagging behind our climate goals. This graph here just shows real quickly the top line that's, what is that, like a reddish? I believe that's red, yeah. That's where we're at right now. That's our current trajectory. The one below it is where we were under the Obama administration, and then the one below that, the green line, is where we need to be to get to zero by 2050 there. So we've got some work to do. So this is a tool. I want to spend a little bit of time on this. We'll probably spend 10, 12 minutes. This is our public lands mapping tool that the Wilderness Society created with our great GIS team. And this mapping tool you can use on your smartphone, you can use on your desktop, laptop, tablet, anything like that. So it's really a great tool to use. I highly encourage to use it. So to go through the basics here, and then we'll go through 1 or 2 examples for the sake of time, and then we'll move on. If you have any additional questions, please let us know. We'll have our contact information at the end of this presentation. So if you look to the top right, let's go to the top right first, and I want to show you these icons. So the first one is the legend. Pretty self-explanatory, but it gives you the color-coded breakdown of all the lands. So this map will show you all of the public lands in the United States, as well as impaired waterways, as well as oil and gas leases. So that goes from like existing leases, pending, leases that were canceled, and so on and so forth. And it's really, once we get down and zoom in, it'll make a little bit more sense. But for now, I want to go to the next one, which is our layer map. And now these layers, again, we're going to leave these on for now, but we will click these off once we zoom in. And these layers, you can turn off, toggle on and off conservation areas. You can toggle on and off the impaired waterways to make it less busy, leases, whatever you want to focus in on, you can just leave those layers on. So we're going to leave this open, and we're going to go over to the search box on the left-hand side there. So that search box, you can put in any address in the US, or you can put in a town, you know, city. For right now, we're going to put in Grand Junction, Colorado, which if you live in Colorado and you've never been there, I recommend it. There's some of the best public lands in the state, in my opinion. It's in my backyard though, so maybe I'm a little biased. Okay, so we'll see all the red lines that I had mentioned. Those are impaired waterways. So if you click above, we're going to click one right there next to Grand Junction. You see how it pulls up that box? Any one of those red lines, it'll pull up that box and give you all the information you could want on that. It'll tell you when it was last reported on, what makes it impaired. So if you scroll down, you'll see in the middle there it says more info, and you can click on that link, and that link will direct you to the EPA government page, which we're going to see if this works here. If not, we will go back into the presentation, but it'll bring up the landing page and tell you all the possible information you could want on it. So this one in particular was impaired for selenium. You can see there at the bottom. So we're going to go back to the presentation in just a second. Bear with us. So yeah, any one of those impaired waterways you can click on, and it'll tell you when it was impaired for, and all of these will redirect you to a government landing page. So if we look over the purple area right there, that's the Colorado National Monument. But if you click on it and look over it, see, it'll bring it up. It'll tell you when it was designated, what it was designated under, which is the Antiquities Act, which, you know, that gives the president the power to declare national monuments. And then also next to it, the yellow you'll see, and all these boundaries are accurate. That's a national conservation area, I believe. I believe that's McInnes Canyons. Yep. So again, that'll give you all the information you want to know. So now we're going to zoom out just a couple clicks. Oh, and by the way, yeah, that plus and minus is how you can control your zoom. And we're going to take off the impaired waterways to make it a little bit less busy. And to do that, you'll see there we are, see our mouse there. We're going to uncheck those. Perfect. And then we're going to zoom out one more click. And I want to do this to show the scope of the leases right nearby. And then we're just going to drag over to the right. And this works just like Google Earth. If you guys have ever messed around with that, you can just click and drag and it'll move for you. So if you'll see there, all of those leases getting closer to the Piceance Basin, this is where, again, these leases, you can click on each one of these and it'll give you information as to the year it was leased, if it's an existing lease, if it's upcoming in a lease sale, all that information. So let's say, for example, there's a lease sale coming up and they're in places that you care about. You can get on, use this tool to find out when that's happening, where it's happening, so that you can then provide a comment, right? Oftentimes people don't have this type of tool readily available to them, but if you save this in your favorites on your browser or in your phone, the link, then you can click on it and just check to see when the new lease sales are happening to see where those, where the conflicts are. But I also wanted to point out that these leases, they overlap conservation areas. So you'll see here Mount Garfield, that orange, right about Palisade. That's Mount Garfield. If anyone's familiar with Grand Junction or the Grand Valley, that's an iconic hike and landmark here. And there's actually a lease that's on top of it. Sorry, our internet's being a little slow right now. But there's a lease right on top of it. And a lot of people may not know that. So I think if you ask anyone in the community or anyone that's visited, they'd say they don't want to see an oil derrick up there or any sort of development going in there. Because even if they don't put an oil derrick there, or not oil, a natural gas derrick, just a derrick there to drill. They drill for natural gas around here would be oil. But anyways, point is there's a lot of infrastructure that goes with that, pipelines and thousands of trucks that move in and out. So it's a burden on the community. So the last thing I want to share for the sake of time is we're going to go to Carlsbad, New Mexico, and show you another function of this tool. And there's so much on here. I'm not even able to get to all of it due to the sake of time. But right below the search box that we put in Carlsbad, you'll see there's two other icons. Well, there's actually three. One's the information, and then the one next to it is conservation lands near me. So if you don't know where the nearest national park, national monument, or other lands near you that are being managed. And then the last one there is energy development near me. So anywhere in the country, you put in your address or put in your town, it'll tell you there's a slide there where you can go, up to, I think it's like 1,000 miles or something, or down to like within a mile. And it'll show you the leases. And the reason why I wanted to show this is because if we go over to the top right-hand corner, it looks like a little Windows icon. Yes, and if we click that, you can change the imagery of the map as well. So you could actually find street, you could use this for a bunch of different functions. But for today, we're going to click on the imagery that shows us what the ground looks like, the satellite imagery, which is the second box on the top row. And we're going to zoom in, and this is by Carlsbad. And we're also going to take off the leases just for now, just so it's less busy. Okay, there it goes. And we're going to zoom in, and you can see as we get a little bit closer here, all of the little dots where the well pads were, just to the right of town, which would be just, I guess, east of town if we were on the ground. It's really all around it. So this is much of the scene that you're seeing in parts of the Southwest, especially in communities that maybe don't have as much money, so they do a lot more drilling around them. And you can just see all those little white dots is where the landscape's been marred. There's roads to go to those, as I mentioned. There's pipelines, there's trucks, and all the impacts, the cumulative impact that comes from that. If you remember in 2015, there was a methane plume that they could see from space over the Four Corners area, and this is part that contributes to that. So the impacts are real, and this is from a satellite image, so you can imagine what it looks like on the ground. So thank you for bearing with us through this tool. There's a lot more you can do. I encourage you, if you have questions, to reach out. But again, for the sake of time, we're going to continue on with the presentation.
And a link
and the
to
link
that,
is,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Jolena.
I was just going to say what you were going to say. Yeah, a link to it will be with all of our other links on the Alliance Center page.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gabriel. That was really informative, and I really hope some people take that and play with it and use it. And now to go on to some more positive things, steps in the right direction. It's really cool to see how many people are finally coming around on recognizing that climate change is a real threat. And according to a 2018 Yale study, 73% of Americans believe climate change is happening, which is an increase of 10 percentage points since March 2015, which is pretty cool. And then only about 1 in 7, according to that same study, don't believe that it's happening. So yeah, optimistic about that. And specifically in Colorado, we can see that around 67% of people believe that climate change is happening. And this is also from Yale, Climate Change in the American Mind. It's sort of this is a screenshot from the tool that you can use. It's another GIS tool like we were just kind of playing with. And we'll include this link with all the other links, but from it, you can see how many people in any county think that climate change is happening. Also cool to note that in different poll, Conservation in the West poll, they found that 70% of Coloradans in 2020 think that climate change is a serious or very serious problem. So even higher number. And this goes into how public lands are a large part of the climate solution. So we know it's happening, and we know that right now public lands are not being used in the right way. And so what can we do to make that better? Some ideas, we have a pledge for net zero climate pollution from public lands by 2030. And this is a pledge that you can sign. Again, this link, p2a.co, my mouse is over it. This link will be included with all the other links. If you want to go sign that pledge right now, I would encourage you to basically just to support our mission of making public lands a part of the climate solution. To break it down a little bit, we have a few specific ideas or 4 key actions that we believe need to happen to make public lands part of the solution. Firstly, we need to make the community demand policy change to create a more transparent system. So right now, the Wilderness Society is engaged in policy that would demand the government track emissions from fossil fuel development on public lands. And this is really just all American citizens have a right to know what these companies are putting into our air and our collective water, our collective resource. And if they're putting stuff in that's going to be killing us and our most vulnerable or people of color or elderly or young, then we need to know this stuff. And so that's one of our actions. Our second is that we need to all take ownership of our shared lands and support the protection of large, intact, and connected landscapes. So if you don't see yourself as a owner or a steward of public lands, you are. And a lot of people forget this. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter if you have been going to these lands for your whole life or you just started, you went on one hike once. These are your lands to steward and to care for. And that's really empowering once you do start to realize that. So we really want everyone to take ownership of that. And the Wilderness Society scientists are doing research right now to identify what places are most important to protect, which ecosystems will help climate resiliency the most. And we want to support the protection of those places. And if you have any places that are close to you physically or close to your heart emotionally, always reach out to the Wilderness Society and we can work specifically on protection of certain areas. We're always looking for important areas to protect. We also want to support, thirdly, renewable energy development in the right places, not in places where wildlife is fragile, ecosystems are fragile, but in places where there's high energy potential and a low risk and low impact on wildlife. And so the Wilderness Society is open to working with energy companies and promoting policies that are going to help us shift to renewable energy for public lands, which is going to help us with this climate crisis and help reduce the impact of climate change and slow it down. And fourthly, we want to just continue to learn more. So what you're doing today by joining us with this presentation is awesome. That's what we want everyone to be doing, just learning more, feeling empowered by the knowledge that they have about climate change and what they can do to help make a difference and help mitigate the disastrous impacts, frankly, that will come if we continue to allow oil and gas to rule our public lands. So just keep learning and let's keep holding elected officials accountable and let's keep being proactive. And also just opening this up to reach out to me or Gabriel or anyone from the Wilderness Society at any time. I think most of us are pretty responsive if you have something to say. And we really do want to help, and we really do like to collaborate in order to accomplish our missions. And so, yes, we can start with signing the pledge, of course. And, you know, not just the pledge, but also there are other actions that we can lead you to. Another thing to note is that even ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, oil companies said that they would report and share climate risk. So this really isn't a issue that is that controversial or partisan. It's pretty much just fact at this point. And so if even oil and gas companies are willing to share climate risk, then I think all of us should be willing to do the same.
That's a great point, Jolena. And so as Jolena mentioned, there are a lot of other actions you can take. We strongly encourage you to please sign the pledge. But there's a lot of other stuff and great work that we do around the nation. So please get involved or reach out to one of us. Another one you can take here in Colorado is to ask our legislators here in Colorado to support the CORE Act. Senator Michael Bennett and Representative Magoo's introduced this over a year ago, and it has a lot of support, bipartisan support here in Colorado, but we still could use additional support from Senator Cory Gardner or Representative Tipton. But what the CORE Act does, it stands for the Colorado Outdoor Recreation Economy Act, and it protects 400,000 acres of public lands. Those are across the state, so some of those lands are in the San Juan Mountains. Just to clarify, that 400,000 acres is not all wilderness. Only 73,000 of it is wilderness. The others are managed for special management. But the San Juan Mountains are part of the protections there. The Thompson Divide is the water source for Carbondale, also the Lower Gunnison, which feeds the North Fork Valley, Paonia, around that area. Which the North Fork is home to the highest altitude vineyards in the world, and outdoor recreation is drivers in those for those local communities. So it's the headwaters for those communities very important. Also important for wildlife corridor, and the folks that live there absolutely love it, and that's why they came together to see it protected. Their own Thompson Divide Coalition. Other parts include the Curriconti National Recreation Area. If anyone's been up to Blue Mesa or Montrose County, they're familiar with that. That's actually, I think, the largest body of water in Colorado there, the reservoir. Beautiful. Curriconti is absolutely beautiful. If you've never been there, I highly recommend it. So that would protect that permanently. Another part of that is the Continental Divide and Camp Hale. So Camp Hale would be the nation's first National Historic Landscape. That's where the 10th Mountain Division, they were the elite soldiers that fought in the mountains. They trained there during World War II to fight the Nazis. So this would be memorializing our troops, their legacy, so that we can have the freedoms to be here today. I think that would be really cool. And also that's an area where people do recreate as well. It's a very beautiful country up there as well. Other actions you can take, are going to rallies, letter writing, participating in advocacy days. There's a global climate strike coming up. Maybe that's something that interests you. So a lot of different actions you can take. And then this page here is just giving you our information. So we have our website there at the top, a ton of great resources on our website. We didn't even touch about some of the Too Wild to Drill landscapes and other efforts that we have. We have a bunch of great toolkits for, whether you're a nonprofit organization, smaller one that's been around for a while, or just other nonprofits that you find these tools useful. We want these shared far and wide. There's our Twitter handle, Instagram, and Facebook. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And, when you're tweeting something out, right, you want to tag your representative as well. If you want to give a shout out to us too, that's cool. But, there's a lot of ways, as we know, that we can take action through social media. And then our emails are right there below them, Gabriel and Jolena.
Yeah. Just want to reiterate Gabriel's point. Please reach out and please connect with us. Thank you so much for coming and learning about what we're doing, but there's so much more to talk about, and there's so many ways that you specifically can get involved based on your interests and what you're most drawn to and what your skill sets are. So reach out to us individually, and we're open to discuss always. And thank you so much for joining us. Yeah.
Thank you. Stay safe.